Here we go, we're live. Hi everyone, very happy to introduce John Brownlow today.
Hello.
Hello. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your books?
Yes, I've been a writer for a long while. I started out making documentaries for British TV, made a lot of documentaries for Channel 4, and then I eventually moved over into writing screenplays, and I wrote screenplays for Hollywood studios and TV shows and so on and so forth, most of which never got made because that's the way that industry works. But I made a few things, and then kind of always had some ideas for novels. Tried to write a novel once that was a terrible, dismal failure that never saw the light of day. And then in the pandemic, um, I think a lot of people tried new things in the pandemic, and so I thought it was really my one chance to have a go at writing a novel. And there was a excuse me, there was an idea that I had. I initially pitched it as a film several times, that I really wanted to tell, and I had the voice of the character in my head, and so I just started writing it, and 3 months later, I'd written a book, and then I had to figure out what the heck to do. I knew nothing about, I've worked in the film industry for a long while, and I know how you do that, but I had no idea how you do books. So I had to. It was like going back to the beginning again, trying to learn about agents and publishers and the industry and deals and processes and copy editing and all of that stuff. So all of which came to culminated yesterday with the first publication day. So yesterday it went live, and now I'm just sitting there refreshing Goodreads, trying to see what the reviews are like.
Oh, have you been reading your reviews?
Oh yeah, I always read the reviews. I love reviews. I think reviews are great because um, you reviews are great because people don't know you, so they tell the truth in reviews. If when you're talking to agents and publishers and friends and family and so on, they all kind of will massage what they say because they know you or because they're in business with you. But reviews are brutal. They're fantastic. And I love the bad reviews as much as the good reviews because I think that um, you shouldn't write something that everybody likes. I think you should write something that some people like a lot, and if and other people don't like at all. Um, and often the bad reviews and good reviews are equally important. I think the bad reviews often tell you a lot about what you could do better, and the good reviews tell you what you're doing right and should do more of.
Oh, we've got some good comments already. Laura has said hello both. She loves 17, finished it yesterday on Pigeonhole.
Great, thank you very much.
Uh,
Pigeonhole is fantastic. I totally recommend it to people. It's really good for authors as well because you see people's responses in real time. As an author, you know the story, so you try and build cliffhangers and so on, but you know how the cliffhanger turns out. So it's really really interesting to see people's comments as they're writing the book, which normally you don't see in reviews. People wondering where it's going to go next. That's really helpful, really interesting.
well, Sam has just commented. She says she's enjoying 17. No idea where it's going. She loves
Oh, I better not do any spoilers then.
Maybe we need to work out where she's got to so we know where is okay
Right.
to talk about. Um, it kind of, I'm trying to think about how best to explain it. It sort of starts at a really kind of clever kind of way of him describing himself, doesn't it? And then it just launches and is like a non-stop ride.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, my model for it was that I wanted it to be like a bowl of Doritos, so that or a bowl of salt and vinegar crisps, that you have one, or hobnobs, or a pack of hobnobs that you have one, and then you have another, and then it's very, it was I wanted it to be parceled out in little digestible bits, and have you keep reading, but also I think one of the ambitions with it was to do. I've written a lot of thrillers as a screenwriter, and I always got a bit pissed off with them because I didn't really like the characters, and I, there's a stereotype of the kind of good-looking macho Hulk kind of character who you see in every single spy novel, and I kind of wanted to take that apart a bit. And so, although he, as you say at the beginning, he describes himself, but he's not. He's he's sort of believing his own publicity at the beginning, and the book's really about the fact that his publicity is not accurate at all. And so that was the part of the story that interested me most, was him sort of coming apart at the seams, and what the effects of being a violent person like that are on a human being.
Yeah, and I think that comes across quite well sort of throughout the story. You told me when we were recording the promo that you've sort of got an idea for it being a series.
Yes, it is. I mean, it was the original idea was not a series, but then as I thought about it, it became a series in my head because, again, having written a lot of thrillers and sort of being a professional consumer of spy novels, and spy stories, not novels, but real spy stories, I have a ton of them in my head from all eras, from Nazi Germany to Tsarist Russia at the turn of the century to World War One to Cuban Revolution, North Korea, Russia, all of that stuff. And I thought that because there's this kind of string of characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 16, 17, 18, it would be a way of telling stories in all of those different eras, but stringing them together into a kind of coherent whole. That there will be characters. I've just finished 18, the novel, and some of the characters from 17 recur in 18. So there'll be some familiar faces in there, but they're in a different context, which is interesting. And then the one after that will be 16, and we'll learn about 16's origin story. And there'll be some of the characters from 17 in that, but they'll again be in a different context. So in a way, the idea was it was almost like the Marvel or DC universe, that there would be this kind of world that you could tell stories in, rather than it just being about one character.
Sam's already said a great idea. Sounds tricky. It should be.
Yeah, if it's tricky, that's the reason for doing it. If it was easy, everyone would do it.
So I don't, full confession, read many spy stories, but I've literally just back to back almost read your book, and
Yeah.
then The Coldest City, which is what Atomic Blonde is based on.
Okay. It's interesting, isn't it? Most of my readers that I've been aware of so far have been women. I don't know whether it's just because women read a lot more books, or because there's a sort of an appetite among female readers for thrillers, but that are not macho kinds of thrillers. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't read thrillers normally, so I'm probably not like the target audience. But um, they both read really well, and I wondered if you'd be tempted to sort of turn 17 into like a graphic novel.
I've thought about it. I mean, I've never written a graphic novel. It's certainly something it's been sort of vaguely discussed. It's I mean, it's going to be a movie. Not often with graphic novels, they're the first thing that gets written, as opposed to an adaptation later. But it certainly would work as a graphic novel. I mean, years ago I did consider it. Just paying. I mean, the thing about graphic novels is you have to have a fantastic artist, right? The actual writing part of it is fairly straightforward. It's the artwork that makes the graphic novel work or not. Yeah, certainly thought about it.
It just, both stories work quite well, but they're both very kind of action based.
Yeah.
And what worked for me in the graphic of The Coldest City was that you saw all that play out, and it kind of added to the twists and turns of the plot. And I could imagine yours being very
Right.
similar. The movie
Yes.
would be really good, you know.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons it was, as I say, it was originally an idea for a movie, and I think in movie terms, because that's what I've done for a long while. And honestly, the way that I write either a screenplay or a book is I kind of close my eyes and watch the movie in my head and then describe it. So uh, I think also having written, I've adapted a lot of books. So often, what will happen when you're writing a movie is that someone will send you a book and say, "Can you adapt this?" And so you then, part of the process of that is analyzing the book and taking it apart and trying to work out what's going to work on screen and what isn't going to work on screen. So I think that it's hard to not think about it like that when you're writing the novel. Like when I'm writing the novel, I'm also thinking, how does this work as a movie? So I mean, it's probably limiting, but that's who I am. That's why I write.
Well, I wonder if it isn't limiting because obviously the first outing you've had as an author has been fairly successful so far. Everyone who's commenting who's read it has enjoyed the book.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there are different kinds of books, aren't there? That's what I mean about the bad reviews and good reviews. I'm happy to write something that some people enjoy, and I'm equally happy that other people don't like it. They don't have to. They can. They're welcome to. Not finish it. That's absolutely fine.
So you're writing the screenplay for 17, aren't you?
Yeah, I've basically finished it. We're kind of at the revision stage now.
Do you think that sort of process, like you were saying, of picking apart books for adapting them has helped you as an author?
Yes, enormously, because you realize um, you become. It's helpful to be analytical about it because when you very common experience when you get a book that someone wants to adapt as a movie is that you'll read it, and often they have a very fantastic premise or setting and really interesting characters. And the most common thing is that they start really well, and then the ending doesn't really satisfy you. It doesn't, or either it doesn't make sense, or it doesn't kind of wrap up everything in a way that feels, um, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like an ending. And so trying to be analytical about why that is and it, learning what makes a story, I think that it was really helpful for. I mean, it's mostly about plot, and I think that there were some of the comments about the novel are that it's well plotted, it's well paced, and so on. And I think that sorry, there's a plane going over here. Um, I think that plot is something you get very good at as a screenwriter. Character is much harder. I mean, it's a very different thing in a novel from a screenplay because a screenplay basically you rely on the person who's reading a screenplay to imagine, that there's actors are going to be involved. It's going to be Meryl Streep or it's going to be, Hugh Jackman or whatever. And when you read a screenplay, you're imagining what the cinematographer is going to do, what the director is going to do, what the production designer is going to do, what the editor is going to do, what the composer is going to do. And so a screenplay is very much a blueprint that other people can build on. Whereas when you write a novel, you've got to do all those jobs yourself with words. So, so the plotting aspect of it is very similar, but the other aspects are quite different.
One of the bits I really enjoyed in the book, and I don't know if this is a thing that happens in reality, was when the character goes to like the location kind of offices to like find where something is.
Yes.
Is that like a service that actually exists?
Oh
Or
yeah, you mean for like a location managers? Yes, absolutely. I've done it. Like yeah, literally. I was once trying to find a graveyard, a cemetery for a film, and yeah, you go to the local film office, and they um, have funds from the state or from the province or whoever it is that they use to pay location man. And I have friends who are location managers, and yeah, basically they're paid to find locations, so they know everywhere. They're very interesting people.
do they just I was trying to get in the head of how they did it while I was reading the book, and I was like, do they just spend hours just driving around?
Yeah, they really do. They like when they on their off days, they'll go into visit places and take pictures and so on. And they know that um, most regions have well, there are certain kind of things in movies that crop up again and again and again, like big houses, industrial areas, grand kind of, period pieces, country houses, that kind of thing. So, Yeah, I mean, often they would work as juniors originally, location assistants and so on. And so yeah, that's literally what they do. And then usually they'll have a massive file of photographs of places that they've been, and they just on off days they'll go and explore and find places.
So I interviewed an author a while ago who wrote for kind of television and things. And he said deliberately when he wrote his series of books, he sort of wrote some scenes to be really hard to film because he could get away with, like, he wasn't writing it for a script or a
Yes.
thing, if
Oh,
you know
sure.
what I mean? So he could have anything he wanted. So he blew up like the
Yes.
entirety of Covent Garden.
Yes. Yes.
It would
Absolutely.
be like really hard to do on like a film, but or really expensive, but he could just do because it was his book.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, they can fake everything in CGI now in movies, so it's not such of a not a big as big an issue as it used to be. Um, but I mean, I do try to be very specific about locations. So whenever you see a location in the book, it's a real place. I mean, you may not know where it is. It may not be in the like, for example, I won't give anything away, but Handler's house, who we see at the end, the palazzo, is based on a real place that I have photographs of. I can't tell you where it is, but it's a real place because I think that reality it feels real when you use real stuff.
So is that a thing? Like when the adaptation is made of 17, will you give them those places and like
Oh yeah,
photos and things and be like, I want you
I've
to?
already said yeah. I sent the director the pictures of the palazzo, and which is an amazing place. Yes, absolutely.
Do you also, when you're writing it, sort of, I know like it's a really common question of author interviews to be like, have you cast it in your head? But I'm wondering if you did.
No, I didn't, and I sort of deliberately didn't because it's probably not obvious, but I'm very. There's no detailed description of what 17 looks like in the book, and that was very deliberate because I didn't. I wanted it. I wanted him to. Wanted any reader to be able to read it and imagine themselves as him. So whether they were black or Asian or white or Native American or whatever, I wanted you to be able to imagine that was obviously he's male, so that but and Kat is the same. That she's not. I mean, the only thing you really know about her is that she's got green eyes, and so I mean, I think Kat is the. I have slightly cast Kat in my head, but only because I wanted to have a kind of physical model for it. I mean, I don't think they were like casting is a weird thing. It's so whenever you think of casting in your head, it's always wrong. They always find somebody else. But I don't know whether you ever watched the show Money Heist, uh, Spanish thriller show. There's a one of the leads in that. It's called Tokyo. That's who I thought about. Cat. The Cat's also based on people I know as well.
Sam has said she thinks 17 not having a description is great. He's a man of many faces, so it works really well.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I mean, some people object to it. Some people want to have a kind of they want to know the color of the curtains and everything. But I think that your imagination does a lot of work. So no, I'm glad that someone liked it.
And I think the more sort of descriptive you get about a character, especially in a book, if someone really loves it, if then the actor who plays it isn't exactly how it's described,
Yeah, that's true.
or you've imagined it, then
Yeah.
it sort of puts you off of the.
Yes. I mean, there's also this kind of diversity aspect at the moment as well, which is that people. I was just talking to my son's girlfriend today, and she was saying that she wants to read books that are not necessarily about stereotypical white guys, and I'm not the right guy to write in the person of another ethnicity, but I can leave some space for people to read it differently.
Sam has said your career path is intriguing. One job, etc., doesn't necessarily follow the other in a way you would expect.
Yes, that's true. I've done a lot of jobs. I didn't even tell you some of the jobs I've done. My first ever job out of school was as a junior rocket scientist, believe it or not. um, And then, yeah, I've picked potatoes, and I've worked in an art gallery where I unwrapped shrunken heads, and I've done and been a photographer. I've done a lot of things, but I think they are all kind of the same thing. Um, I think I'm quite easily bored, so I tend to jump ship every now and again.
Fair enough. Will is another one who's just joined us. He said it's not his usual read, but he's really enjoying 17.
I'm glad. I'm glad. I hope that's true. It seems like a lot of people who I maybe it's just because of the kinds of people who get advanced copies and so on. But it seems like a lot of the people who've read it have said, "Oh, it's not the kind of thing I normally read, but I'm enjoying it." So I hope that's true. I mean, um, talking to the publisher about it, about the next book as well. They were very keen that it appeal as much to women as men, which I'm 1,000% behind. But there are certain things in the thriller genre that you have to watch out for because they could be a big turnoff to women.
So you were saying that you sort of have written or sort of done a lot of research into spy things
Yeah,
because of your job, like script writing and things.
yeah.
What did that help when you were writing the book? What kind of research did you have to do? 17.
Um, well, a lot of the spy research is just stuff that I've done over the last 25 years. So it's just stuff that's in my head. I sort of know how the CIA works, and I know, what the relationship between a government and spy agencies is, and I know the technology. Um, One of the kind of hidden secret of the book is that, excuse me, the whole premise that there's this kind of world of superstar assassins, and they have managers and handlers and agents and so on, is almost a joke because it's based on my experiences in Hollywood with the Hollywood system. So, handler 17's agent is very much based on a real Hollywood agent who I knew. um, so it was a way of using some of the funny stuff that I've seen in Hollywood and transplanting that into the world of spies. I mean, in terms of research for the book, it was much more things like um, researching what that part of South Dakota is like, what the Badlands are like. Gun. I'm not. I have weapons training, but I don't know a lot about guns. So a lot of it was just like learning about what kind of guns people would have, and that kind of stuff. I'm trying to think about other stuff that might be. And yes, literally just locations like the palazzo that I was describing to you, trying to find a place that looked like the kind of place where I would want to set that big scene at the end. That's the kind of. I've Google open permanently, and I probably Google 10 times an hour while I'm writing.
I kind of did that. That's the thing that I thought was quite refreshing again at the beginning. That when he's introducing himself, he's like, "Most spies aren't this."
Yeah. Well, that was. Yeah, I mean, that was. I tell you why that came into my head because I'd been reading and writing a lot of spy stuff, and it was all really grim and boring, and everyone wanted to seem like write the most realistic spy story you possibly could. And then I was thinking about James Bond, which is the least realistic spy story you could possibly imagine, and I loved that kind of, you know, the joie de vivre of Sean Connery and all of that stuff, and so it was a sort of wish fulfillment thing to tell the reader that this isn't going to be one of those kind of grim stories out of Le Carre which feels very real. It's going to be, it's a work of imagination and fun. I want it to be fun, right? That was the main thing.
Yeah, there's a definite sort of strong thread of humour throughout. I think, like the bits where he mocks the cars that he's driving, and
yeah, and he's really mocking the whole idea of spies for a lot of it as well, and mocking himself, I think. One of the things that happens in the book, not to give too much away, is that he's far from perfect. He makes mistakes, which is something that doesn't happen that often in spy stories. But he's quite fallible, which is where some of the humor comes from, because then the mistakes get him into terrible trouble. But also it makes him somewhat human, I think, which is, again, I didn't want him to be one of those spy characters who, is a former soldier of fortune or CIA agent and has got all the training and blah blah blah, blah, because I'm not like that, and I don't particularly like those characters. I wanted him to be a character who'd um, sort of created himself, and I wanted to understand, what his background was, which is why all the stuff about his childhood is very important, I think.
Yeah, I think the backstory of both 17 and 16 are particularly important. They make them more real.
Yeah, in fact, when I was writing it, this is another secret, is that I wrote about the first third of the book, and then I had to stop because I was getting very, I basically didn't like him very much, and I was thinking, oh, you know what, I'm not sure I can finish a book about this character because I don't particularly like him. And then I just started writing about the backstory, and then I suddenly liked him, and I kind of knew where he was coming from, and it also really helped with where the book was going to go. And he ends in a very different place from where he starts. He's not the same guy at the end as he was at the beginning.
Yeah, agreed. Without giving away a spoiler, he's
Yeah.
not the same guy. You've been asked if you're in the UK and where the book is at.
I am not in the UK. I am sitting. I mean, I live in Canada, and I'm sitting about 3.5 hours north of Toronto at the moment, absolutely in the middle of nowhere. We're on vacation by the lake, so I'm just trying. I'm sitting in a car park trying to get cell service. The book is set in. 17 is American. The book is set in. It starts in South Dakota, and it moves around after that to all sorts of places. There are sections of it that is set in California. Some of it is in Beirut, and I think it ends back in California again. So yeah, it's American. It's American set. The next book is much more international, but I do have some English stories in my head, but I need to run this one through first.
That's yeah. Oh, someone's saying they're going to have to buy it, aren't they?
I hope so. Yes, go ahead. Stop you.
Someone else said they think women prefer everyday heroes rather than special ops guys.
Well, I do personally, so
I think it's one of the things that used to put me off the thriller genre. Sort of things like James Bond and stuff like that, where they're like sort of kind of superheroes almost.
yeah, I agree. I wanted it to be, I mean, it's a larger than life story, but I did want it to sort of obey the laws of gravity to some extent.
And then, Laura said Handler was the epitome of the Hollywood agent.
He is. Yeah. I can't reveal who he's based on, but he's based on a real person.
Has anyone who's read your book, who knows you, sort of said to you, "I recognize this person," or?
No, but when I told people in Hollywood know of the character who Handler's based on, and the moment that I tell them, they go like, "Oh, of course it is." So there's usually they laugh a lot at that point because it's exactly who it is. And one thing that's really true is that he has, I think in the book it describes his habit that when he's talking to you, he's always looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important is in the room, and that's absolutely what Hollywood agents do all the time. It's very off-putting that everyone in Hollywood has had that experience.
Willa said he does come across as quite arrogant and up himself at the beginning, so when things start going wrong for him, it humanizes him for the reader.
I think that's true, and that was quite. I mean, what really interested me about the character was to maybe upend the stereotype of the emotionless hitman, of the guy who's sort of emotionally invulnerable, who, because killing people is a really big thing. You can't possibly imagine killing someone unless you're a unless you're a psychopath, it not having an enormous effect on you. And so in the book, he begins in complete denial about the effect that it's having on him. And 16 is someone who's sort of at the other end of the tunnel, who has at the other end of his career has, again, without putting any spoilers in it, he's dealing with the consequences of having killed with so many people, on him, psychologically consequences. Now that was something that was important, but it's quite dark, and so I didn't want it to be a grim book. So that's why there's humor in there as well.
Yeah, I think it's very well handled. You were saying you've got some other stories in your mind after. Have you got sort of other genres that you'd be tempted to write in?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think probably almost always going to be thrillers of one kind or another. There's a big sort of I don't know, psychological thriller that will write, I'm sure, at some point, which is a sort of murder mystery through the eyes of a child. There's a crazy story that I want to tell, a detective story, which is almost speculative fiction, but it's about a character who, hopefully, people will never put these two and two together, but because I'm going to give away the whole book now. But it's about a detective who finds out that he's not only the detective and the murderer, but also the victim in a murder. So um, that's a weird one that I want to write. And then I've also, my family come from Lincolnshire, and during World War II, they lived, and they still live, around the bomber bases that the Lancasters would fly from for the dam busters and so on. My grandfather was a quartermaster at the RAF station there, and I know an awful lot of stories from that world of Bomber County, basically they called it. There were spies there. There were all sorts of. There were American servicemen there. There was crazy things happened there that I would love to tell. And I think there's probably a series of books I could tell about that world.
Yeah, we chatted about this, didn't we, at the promo? Because I was
Yeah.
on an RAF base.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So my mum's like for example, I was in the UK just a month ago, and Bomber Command were having a big not I don't know what they were. They don't say celebration; they say a commemoration. I don't know whether it was 75 years or what it was, something like that. And my mum, who had written some memories about being in the village during the wartime, was invited, and she couldn't go because she wasn't well, and so they'd kind of invited the family to this commemoration, and we were all ready to go, and then my mum said, "Oh, I don't think I want you to go," because she had very mixed feelings about it. Because although she, they the boys were flying out from Lincoln and coming back, and there were, many of them would be dead and so on. She also knew that they were dropping bombs on Germany, and so she just, in the end, we didn't go because we just didn't feel right about it.
Yeah, it seems reasonable. So, one of our group's favourite questions is if
Yes.
you ever acted out a scene in your book as you've written it.
No, but I do say the dialogue out loud, completely unconsciously. I'll find I only realize afterwards that I've been saying the words. Um, yeah, no, I don't do I'm not a good actor, so I do think about it. I do choreograph. I'm very specific, very precise about choreography. I'd like to know how something gets from A to B. I kind of want to know in my head which hand is holding something, and I want it to be very, yeah. So I do think about the actual choreography of it really carefully. And for example, in the action scenes, there may or may not be an actual diagram of what's going on, but I could certainly draw you a very specific diagram of how the roads are, and where everyone lives and all that stuff.
Yes, I thought as a screenwriter you might have been like, yes, I block everything out.
No, 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 no. I've no.
We have had some epic answers to that question, by the way. We've had
Oh,
people
really?
like,
No,
yeah,
I'm so
we've had
sorry to
answers
disappoint.
who have put themselves in boots of cars, tied up their husbands to see if they could escape, acted out fight scenes in all kinds of crazy places.
Oh, really? No, I've not done any of that. I mean, I did a lot of weird things in my life. You know, in my former life as a documentary maker. I think the weirdest stuff I've done is people, because as a documentary maker, well, you do end up in some crazy, bizarre situations, like being lowered out of helicopters and things like that. But it's more that you meet the craziest people. You know, as a young 20 something researcher, you're suddenly meeting murderers and archbishops and former prime ministers and terrorists, so nuclear physicists, and just the bizarrest cowboys, and so you get a very and many other people, just ordinary people who have great stories to tell, so you get a sort of very broad ranging exposure to the human condition, which I think does makes it easier to write characters, because or put there are very few characters who are in the book who are made up. Most of the characters are based on real people, or you know two or three people pushed together into one character. um, and I think that it's nice to have a big deep bag of people who you've spoken to, who you can dramatize.
Sam has just stolen my question I was going to ask. So, do you have a favorite documentary to recommend? She likes all kinds of stories.
Oh boy. Well, I always say that I don't like to. I never rank things. I hate those kind of top five lists and so on, because I don't think that art is a competition, and so I think there are lots of good documentaries. So I'd be reluctant to say that there's a favorite one. But I the ones I've enjoyed the most are I love rock and roll documentaries, and there's a Penelope Spheris documentary called "The Decline of Western Civilization," parts one and two. What I think part one, can't remember. I think part one is about punk rock in California, and part two is about heavy metal. And those are absolutely the most entertaining things you could watch. Yeah, I love all sorts of music documentaries, basically, because I spent a lot of time in the music business, and it's crazier than any other business on earth. So even Hollywood. So
I know there are some wild. We just watched one about Woodstock in
oh
'99.
yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? I
I
watched that.
know. We were just like, oh my god.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite entertaining. Do you like to read thrillers then?
You know, I don't really, because it, having spent so basically whenever I'm sent a book, it's almost always um, to potentially adapt for TV or for a movie. So I find it very hard to read a book without getting very analytical about it and starting to wonder how I would adapt it. So, and when I'm writing, which is most of the time because I'm a bit of a workaholic, um, if you're writing 2,000 words a day or something like that, at the end of it, you're kind of done with words in the screen. I don't really have any gas in the tank for that. And similarly, I don't really necessarily want to watch TV because I'm always watching TV with the analytical mind. So my I relax by playing music, which has got nothing to do with words. So um, I mean, I've read a lot of thrillers mostly for work, but it's not something that I find particularly relaxing.
So when you do read for pleasure,
Yeah.
if you do, what kind of books do you enjoy?
Uh, 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 I read nonfiction. I love technical stuff. There's the best book I've read in. I mean, I know I don't do lists, but one of the best books I've read in a long while is something. It kind of gave me the idea for the next book. Is a book by Nicole Perlroth, who's a New York Times reporter, and she wrote this book called "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends," which is it sounds as though it's going to be really boring. It's about computer malware and viruses and 0 days and so on. It's the most terrifying book, and just like it's amazing. So I read books like that. I read history books. I read a lot of books about the sort of Cold War spying and so on. I find that really fascinating. So yeah, I nonfiction I would read for relaxation more than fiction.
Yeah, I think good non-fiction books can be really entertaining. One of my favourite books of the year was Vaxxers.
Was what, sorry?
It's called Vaxxers. It's about the development and testing of the COVID vaccine by
Oh yeah,
AstraZeneca.
right. Yeah, that sounds fascinating.
And it's really interesting.
Yeah, I bet. And I've really enjoyed. There's a lot of books that have been written about uh, Russia, Putin, and the oligarchs, and all of that stuff. I find that stuff fascinating as well.
So the book you were saying about, the one like This Is How the World Ends, is
Yeah,
that
this is how they tell me the world ends. Yeah.
yeah. Does that sort of, because you've got quite a lot of technical stuff even in 17, haven't you? There's
Yeah.
a great kind of character who helps him with his technical.
Oh yeah, it was based on a real character.
Is he?
Yes,
He
he
was one
is.
of
Yeah.
my favourites. I really liked him.
Yeah.
Um,
Go on.
so is that sort of a thing you're really interested in? Is that where that came from, or
Is what? Sorry, say. Is what I'm interested in?
the sort of the technical kind of aspects of it? What
Yeah, I think.
that
Well,
character?
I'm interested in them insofar as they help you create stories. So, um, you know, like there's a whole section in 17 about Dead Man's Switch, which is, the which is led me down the rabbit hole of learning about the Trident submarines and how the letters of last resort work and so on and so forth. And so there's a I love going down the Wikipedia rabbit hole. Like often you'll start, um, I just have a question about how does this work, and then you start going to Wikipedia, and that takes you down another hole, and it takes you down another hole, and it takes you down another hole, and eventually you discover something really surprising that you didn't know. That is a sort of incidental pleasure for the reader, because the reader then reads something, they go, oh, I didn't know that, that's really interesting, and then is that really true, and then they go to Wikipedia and look it up. Oh yeah, it is. um,
Yeah, I think it's a bit about codes hidden in like
yes, steganography. Yes,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. That's the kind of thing that I mean, that yeah, it's not interesting in and of itself, but it gives me a great story idea, and then it becomes interesting because it's part of the story. Like if I was just to tell you about those codes without any context, it would be really boring. But when you learn about them in the context of a story, they become interesting.
I'm curious. Oh, I'd love to meet the real character who.
He's dead, I think. He was. There's another really interesting book is called which is where I found him. There's a very interesting book called The Moral Dilemmas of Spying, and which is written by a CIA ethicist, and basically lists, I think it's 100 different scenarios about what the ethical dilemmas of spying are, whether you should kill someone, whether you shouldn't, whether you should betray someone, whether you shouldn't, and so on and so forth. And he crops up in that story, and he was, I mean, basically the same story, that he was the head of station in Beirut who was a drunk and a philanderer, and was basically um, pulled out of his station and demoted, and he felt very bad. He felt really badly about it, so he threatened to expose all of the spies he knew, as in sort of revenge to the CIA. I kind of made up the dune buggy, so and the and his religious conversion was made up, but there really was a guy who did all the other stuff.
Cool. Um, as someone who sort of reads those things very analytically, what advice would you give to authors who are about to start writing?
Oh, Yes. So the two most important words that an author ever writes are the and end. So if you start writing something, finish it. And here's how. There's a secret to finishing things, which is that plan it. Here's what I do. I do this with every novel and everything I write. I start as one sentence. I just tell what the story is. It's, for example, 17. It might be one hitman versus another. And then I split that into a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I write one sentence for the beginning, one sentence for the middle, and one sentence for the end. And now I've already got my story. I only have three sentences of it, but I know how it begins. I know what the middle is, and I know what the end is. And then each of those, the beginning, I split that into three sentences: the beginning of the beginning, the middle of the beginning, and the end of the beginning. And then I do that to the middle and I do that to the end. Now I've got 9 sentences, and I just keep doing that. So I always know where I am in the story, and I've always got a complete story from beginning to end, and I'm just filling in the details. So what that means is that if you follow that plan, and obviously you can move things around and change it and play with it and so on, but you never find yourself in that situation where you're halfway through a book and you don't know where it goes or what's happening and so on. And I, whenever inevitably when you write something, always happens, you get bored with it. Like 2/3 of the way through it, you start questioning: is it any good? Is anyone ever going to read this? Excuse me. And you just have to shut yourself up, and you just have to say, just keep telling the story. Um, so that's what I tell myself: just trust the story, keep telling the story, and then when you reach the end, it doesn't matter how bad it is. You give yourself permission to write complete nonsense, and then the only goal is to get to the end and write those two words, the and end, and then you can start trying to make it good after that.
Yeah, Sam said she likes the idea of the three sentences.
Honestly, it's a killer, right? It's a killer. It's so helpful, especially when you kind of you get stuck with an idea, and um, it just is a way of simplifying it.
I'm reading this like kind of horrifying book at the moment by Dave Eggers, and who wrote The Circle.
Yeah,
And as part of it, he's sort of suggesting that it's kind of like a formula to like a good movie. Like there's a set page in like the script, or a set page in like a set part in the book where the like, kind of final sort of build up should happen and things
yeah.
like that. Is that something you think is true, or?
Yes, I think it is. I think that, I mean, you don't have to. Sorry, I'm just opening a window because it's getting very hot in here. You don't have to do that, but there is. People like beginnings, middles, and ends, like that. And if you read a book, I don't care whether it starts at the end and ends at the beginning. There's a first 100 pages. That's the beginning, whether you like it or not. There's the next 200 pages, which is the middle, whether you like it or not. And then there's the last 100 pages, which is the end, whether you like it or not. That's just physically how a book is constructed. So someone reading your book, unless they read the pages in random order, which I don't think many people do, is going to experience your story having a beginning and a middle and an end. And so, and the end, better, at the end, I want someone to think that I enjoyed that. That made me feel better than I did. That was time well spent. Um, I don't understand why anyone would want to write a book that made someone feel worse. Why I don't get why you would do that to someone. That was not a nice. It's not a nice thing to do to a person, to make them feel worse. So I want them to feel better at the end of a book. And so things have beginnings, middles, and ends, and they're right in Hollywood in writing scripts. It's very specific. There's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. There's something that's supposed to happen on page 25 to page 30, which is just purely because a screenplay is 120 pages long because it's 1 minute per page, and if nothing interesting has happened by page 25, people are going to turn off. So, but anyway, I definitely think about that.
Yeah, I won't. Yeah, I think it just really caught me. It was like quite an interesting. Like they made it really mathematical in this, and they.
It is. I mean, there are tons of there are tons of there are tons of models out there. There's one called Save the Cat, which has a very specific model for it. There's a they're not all the same. There's another one called The Writer's Journey or The Hero's Journey, which is another model for it. There's 3-act structure, 5-act structure. Um, most of it is just a way of kind of breaking a big hole. A book is a big thing, and so the more you can break it into parts that you can address individually, the easier it is to chip away at it.
Oh, Laura said you see it in chick lit the most. When a certain thing happens in each book, after a while,
right.
the next one, it's like, here we go.
Yeah, you know what? That it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like people like pop songs have a formula, right? It goes verse, chorus, bridge, for chorus, end, and it's 3 minutes 15 seconds long. And you know what? It's great. It's fantastic to have a structure because you can do. We've had 60 years of pop music using exactly that structure, and people love it. So I think there's when I go to a restaurant, I don't always order a different thing. When I go to a restaurant, I order my favorite thing because that's what I like to eat. And I think that that's absolutely fine. Uh, I they say about so I live in Canada and Montreal is a French-speaking city in Canada, and the Americans say the writer Richard Ford in one I can't remember which book it is says that for the Americans Canada is different enough to be annoying but not different enough to be interesting, and which is entirely true. But I think books should be the other way around. Books should be different enough to be interesting but not different enough to be annoying. Because if I'm writing a thriller and it's the book jacket says I'm a thriller, and you go into the W.H. Smith because you want to read a thriller, it better be a thriller. It better have all the things that you expect from a thriller. There's a kind of promise to you in the cover that I'm gonna have a protagonist in mortal jeopardy, and it's going to be exciting, and they're going to be twists, and so on and so forth. So if it doesn't deliver those things, you're going to feel disappointed.
Yeah, and I think even books like where people have said they're quite formulaic, if you've read, there are some kind of books where if you've read one, you sort of read that, the story structure repeats.
Yeah.
Very obviously in every other book. But even those I don't mind. After a while, I think you can read those and then go back to the next one. After a few months, and it's a bit like going back to an old friend because you know how it's going to go.
Or think about sitcoms on TV. You think that movies have a structure. Sitcoms have an absolutely, it's not necessarily obvious what the structure of a sitcom is, a half-hour sitcom, but sitcoms have a completely rock solid structure that's the same. Every episode of Seinfeld is exactly the same in structure, and yet most popular show ever on TV.
True. This is what makes you a really interesting person to talk to, you see, because you've got all of that experience as well as a really interesting book to talk about.
Well, thanks.
So who is your favourite character out of 17? Who's a favourite person you created? I know you
yeah. Well, see 17. I've written a lot about 17 because he crops up in the next book quite a lot, and I'm sort of because he changes quite a lot in the process of both books. I'm slightly done with him. I mean, it's not that I don't like him; it's just that I don't have a lot more to say about him. Kat is really fascinating character to write because 17 is in some respects like me. I mean, not that I'm an international hitman or anything like that, but his voice is somewhat my voice. Kat is not me at all, and yet she's really entertaining to write because she's completely fearless, stupidly fearless at times, which is also entertaining, and has got a huge mouth on her, which I think is fascinating. And so without giving too much away, she's a character who's going to develop a lot. I really enjoyed writing 16 as well because he's somewhat based on somebody I know, and so the next book is 18. The book after that will be 16, which is his story, and he has a hell of a story. He has an amazing story, which none of which is in 17. Just the hints of it. And I think that I'm really looking forward to writing that because I think it will explain a lot about who he is. Um, and then just in terms of characters I like, Barb is like number one for me, and um, because I've again very much based on people who I used to live in this tiny little rural town in Ontario, which was inhabited almost entirely by Barbs, and they they were the kind of people you understood why anybody who invaded Canada would have a very hard time of it because it was completely populated by women who would kick your ass. Women of a certain age who would kick your ass. And I love those. I do love characters who. So I've pitched a lot of movies and TVs, and one of the things that really bothers me is that I've pitched movies that have. I pitched a movie, a TV show actually, which was about a woman who's kind of very kind of ordinary working class woman who works on the checkout of a supermarket whose son goes missing. He's working for Médecins Sans Frontières or something like that in the Middle East, and she decides she's going to go and find out what happened to him. And in the process, she has to be, in the process, she has to learn how to become a spy, and which I think is a fantastic story. I would love to read or watch that story. And when I pitched it, people go, "Oh, we don't believe it. We don't believe that woman could do that." And it drove me nuts because I don't know, anyone who's had any experience with mums knows that they are the people who would go to the ends of the earth to find a missing child or something like that. And nothing would stop in their way. If they had to learn Arabic, they would do it. And so that's another, that character is somebody else who I would love to write because I think that it really pissed me off that people would underestimate ordinary people so much.
This has been, we've got about 3 minutes left. It's been fast. I could talk to you for hours. Do you want to finish off with a reminder about yourself and your book?
Yeah, so I'll just tell you about this the book. So 17. He's called 17 because he's currently the best hitman in the world. 1 through 15 are all dead, none from natural causes. Number 16 retired at the top of his game and has disappeared at the beginning of the book. And 17 is continually watching his back because the way you become number 18 is by killing 17. So he's a marked man from the beginning. But as the book begins, he's absolutely on top of the top dog. And he in the book he's given the mission to find and kill his predecessor 16, who is the one man on earth who can most assuredly kill him. And so it turns into what really 2 men enter, 1 man leaves, but with a lot of twists, and hopefully it doesn't go at all where you expect it's going to.
Yeah. And then we're going to finish off with a quote from Will, which I think is possibly the best one I've ever had in the author chat, which is, "I'm not an international hitman." Yeah, you would say that.
That's right. I just play one on TV.
I've never had to read out a comment like that before, and I just couldn't miss the opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.